Here comes Renee. She did her homework. Okay, I'm getting the thumbs up. I think the mic was on. I probably broadcast that too. Good evening. It's good to be back together again. We're in Luke chapter 20, if you want to be turning over there. Just a quick reminder that next week we will not be having class. We will be having the Story Slam. I don't know, is it going to be live streamed? Do you know?
Is it in here?
Yeah?
If it's in here, we can live stream.
Well, I know you can, but I don't know if that's the plan or not. So, I don't know where it's going to be. We may be on air, we may not. But we're here tonight. So Jesus has come into Jerusalem. He's accompanied by crowds and disciples who are following him, excited and eagerly anticipating what may be, this is the Passover that the Messiah is going to show up. Okay, and the day of the Lord is coming. I mean, this is going to be great. And Jesus' enemies are already plotting to take him out. They're looking for folks who can turn him over. In fact, while Luke doesn't cover it, in John we know by this time that Lazarus has been raised from the dead. And Annas the high priest has said it's better for one man to die than for the whole nation to die. And they're looking for a way to kill Jesus. And so Jesus doesn't sneak into town. He does exactly the opposite. He comes in riding on a donkey like a king of peace, fulfill an Old Testament prophecy, and right out in the open, and the crowd goes wild. So Jesus makes his way to the temple grounds and begins teaching, and folks come along trying to run him off, trying to trick him, trying to trip him up. Jesus deals with them. He deals with those who think they're in authority. He deals with those who are the smart guys, and we can debate this guy Jesus and we can win. And he deals with the self-righteous, the Pharisees. He gets to the end of that in verse 39, I think it is. Verse 40, it says, no one dared ask him any more questions. And so now, rather than Jesus responding to what's being brought to him, Jesus turns to the crowd and begins giving them information and teaching them. And in verse 41, he says, then Jesus said to them, okay, so he's speaking to the crowd, but he's also, we read this passage, I believe it's in Matthew. It's in both Matthew and Mark, and one of them points out that Jesus is still kind of directing this towards the Pharisees. But he's saying it where everybody can hear. And he says, then Jesus said to them, how is it that they say the Christ is the son of David? David himself declares in the book of Psalms, the Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand until I make your enemies a footstool for your feet. David calls him Lord. How then can he be his son? Matthew, Mark, and Luke all use this. I mean, there are different parts of the other conversations and questions and teachings and stuff that they don't necessarily, they overlap a little bit. But all three of them have Jesus early on in his teaching in the temple with this example. And if you're like me, I've always just kind of read through this kind of fast because it didn't make a whole lot of sense. Yeah, he's quoting from the Psalms. It's another one of those places where there's a prophecy and, I may not exactly see how it is. They think it's a prophecy, but he is quoting a well-known passage from Psalms that everybody there, not just the scribes, not just the Pharisees, attributed as a messianic saying. And in fact, the term son of David was probably the most used term for the Messiah. You know, Jesus used the term himself, Son of Man. But the people, when they were talking about the Messiah, most often said Son of David. In fact, as Jesus was coming, just before Jesus came into Jerusalem, the blind man was calling out, Son of David, have mercy on me. Calling on the Messiah. And interestingly, at the end of these verses, neither Matthew nor Mark nor Luke say that anybody answered. And neither Matthew or Mark or Luke say that Jesus answered the question. It just goes on to other teaching. And so your homework, if you remember, was, why is this passage such a big deal? And why did Jesus start with this early on in his teaching in the temple grounds? All right, we got Jim.
Well, first of all, I'm really been looking forward to your thoughts on it. I keep going back to thinking about how this scene started, or early in this whole scene where they question his authority. What authority do you have? And I think this quote from Psalms is basically saying that the Christ is both divine and flesh, okay, which is pretty radical, and not only that, Jesus has been showing by what authority, by his actions, who is this who can calm the waves in the sea? He is demonstrating only what God can do, including forgiving sins.
Okay, good.
And yet, here he is, a man in the flesh.
Okay, all right, good. Other thoughts about why this passage shows up in all three Gospels, and in each of them is early on in the presentation of what it is that Jesus said to the people. Renee.
I don't have my Bible because I don't know where my husband is, but think about who his audience was.
Okay.
The Pharisees, the people that wanted to kill him. And for him to, as they tried to discredit who he was and what he was, he reminded them, I was prophesied about.
Okay.
I'm here. Whether you like it or not, whether it fits with the position you want to have and what you want to do to me, that doesn't minimize the fact that I am the answer to the prophecies from the Old Testament.
Okay, good. Any other thoughts or comments? These guys, by the way, these guys have nailed it, I think. Okay. What were the people expecting in the Messiah?
A military genius.
They were expecting a king.
A king to get them away.
Okay, a king like David, a warrior king who was going to restore things. And yet, in this prophecy by the warrior king calling his son Lord, it's basically saying it's more than a king. It's a king, but it's divine. Okay? Not just a fleshly king, but a divine king. And without having to say, that's me, it's clear he's pointing to himself. In front of the crowds, in front of the enemies. I'm here, it's not what you expect, it's greater than that. Okay, Mike and then Chris.
You know, and maybe he's also saying not all prophecies, will we ever understand all the prophecies, what they mean? You know, I mean, they're asking questions, trying to get a specific answer, and he's giving them a prophecy that kind of's got this double thing. I mean, yeah, he was from the line of David, son of David, you know, all that stuff, but could it possibly, he's just saying, look, you guys are trying to nitpick. Look at all the prophecies that you are experts on, that you profess, and a lot of them are not in human terms. Some of them, maybe I should
Okay.
not a lot, are not always discernible in human terms, kind of.
Okay. All right, Chris, over here. All right, Matt's quick.
That's fast. Jesus had already been addressed by members of the crowd, by the blind man, other people as Son of David.
That's right.
He was well known as Son of David.
Yep.
And so he's speaking to people about the Son of David. So that that can't have been missed on them. But I'm interested that it follows right after this discussion of the people not being married in heaven, and how you had just previously discussed that they were like angels in heaven, not given in marriage. And so what he's saying, I think, in this parable is that the heavenly realm has different rules
Okay.
and different standards than our earthly realm. So stop trying to conjoin the two.
Okay. So we said that that Jesus didn't answer the question. The question is answered, though. Peter answered it. Go to Acts chapter 2. Peter goes right back to this passage and uses it in the first gospel sermon. I mean, that's how significant this prophecy is. And kind of a lengthy reading, but I think it behooves us and think about the things that have been said, the comments that have been made about Jesus and who he was and what they were expecting, and listen to Peter's sermon maybe with a little different flavor and angle to it. We're going to begin in verse 22. Men of Israel, listen to this. Jesus of Nazareth was a man accredited by God to you by miracles, wonders, and signs, which God did among you through him, as you yourselves know. This man was handed over to you by God's set purpose and foreknowledge, and you, with the help of wicked men, put him to death by nailing him to the cross. But God raised him from the dead, freeing him from the agony of death, because it was impossible for death to keep its hold on him. David said about him, I saw the Lord always before me. Because he's at my right hand, I'll not be shaken. Therefore my heart is glad and my tongue rejoices. My body also will live in hope, because you will not abandon me to the grave, nor will you let your Holy One see decay. You have made known to me the paths of life. You will fill me with joy in your presence. Brothers, I can tell you confidently that the patriarch David died and was buried. And his tomb's here to this day. But he was a prophet and knew that God promised him on oath that he would place one of his descendants on his throne. Seeing what was ahead, he spoke of the resurrection of the Christ, that he was not abandoned to the grave, nor did his holy body see decay. God has raised this Jesus to life, and we are all witnesses of the fact. Exalted to the right hand of God, he has received from the Father the promised Holy Spirit and has poured out what you now see and hear. For David did not ascend to heaven, and yet he said, the Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand until I make your enemies a footstool for your feet. Therefore, let all Israel be assured of this, God has made this Jesus, whom you crucified, both Lord and Christ. Peter answers the question. And I'm sure in the audience, based on the phrases that are here in this sermon, there are people there present who heard Jesus say that in the temple grounds. And it's immediately after this, it says, they're cut to the heart. Now, what are we going to do? Look at what we've done. What are we going to do? This is a very powerful passage, and one that brought home to those that responded to the message the fact that we're not talking about an earthly king. We're talking about something so much greater than that. And Jesus throws it right out there in the temple grounds in front of his enemies. It's as messianic a claim as there can be. And, you still run into people today that say, Jesus never claimed to be divinity. And that's basically an unstudied, ignorant statement from folks who just have not paid attention to what the Scriptures say. Jesus was he's so clear they killed him. His enemies knew exactly what he was. He didn't have to answer the question because they knew. Let's go back to Luke chapter 20. So instead of answering the question, he turns to his disciples, and in a voice that all those around, including his enemies, can hear, verse 45, while all the people were listening, Jesus said to the disciples, "Beware of the teachers of the law. They like to walk around in flowing robes and love to be greeted in the marketplaces and have the most important seats in the synagogues and the places of honor at banquets. They devour widows' houses and for a show make lengthy prayers. Such men will be punished most severely." Imagine you're a Pharisee within earshot of this, a scribe. Okay? We've talked a little bit about the scribe. The scribes in particular were really into being recognized for what they did. In fact, one of the sources that I read says there's an ancient record of two rabbis coming into a meeting and being all upset because they were greeted in the marketplace and whoever said hi to them didn't include their title. And so they were all bent out of shape. They actually taught that the role of a rabbi and a scribe should be more important to a person than even their parents. It was their teaching that if you come across a situation where there's a rabbi and your father who has a heavy load that they can't help, you got to help the rabbi first. Then you go help your parent. Okay? What's that?
No wonder God was upset.
Okay, yeah. I mean, and rabbis were not allowed to take money for their teaching by law. So what did they do? They taught prominently that if you want to do a pious act, if you want to do a really spiritual act, the most spiritual thing you can do is help a rabbi in his ministry. That's what this devouring widows' houses is about, is they were built, under the name, they were kind of, televangelists before they were televangelists, before there was TV. I mean, they were cutthroat, hard-hearted, out for themselves. And Jesus said, these guys, they devour widows' houses. They're going to be punished most severely. And interestingly, what happens next? If I were making the chapters up, I would not start chapter 21 here, because we're still in the same setting, still in the same context. I would start chapter 21 till verse 5. Let's read the first 4 verses. As he looked up, Jesus saw the rich putting their gifts into the temple treasury. He also saw a poor widow put in 2 very small copper coins. I tell you the truth, he said. This poor widow has put in more than all the others. All these people gave their gifts out of their wealth, but she, out of her poverty, put in all she had to live on. He's just talked about the greediness of the religious leaders, and immediately turns and says, look what's going on over here. Don't think it's an accident. Okay. How do we use, what are the points we usually make from these verses? About the widow's mite. By the way, the coin that she put in, we talked last week about recently about the temple tax being a denarius, which was a day's wage. The coin she put in was 1/50 of a denarius. Okay? So a couple of hours worth of labor, maybe not even an hour. And said it was all she had. So what do we typically teach? You guys know these verses. What are the lessons that we teach from these verses, Matt?
I think we've said that it doesn't matter how much you give, but
Okay,
give from the
doesn't
heart.
matter how much you give, okay? Certainly, this lady's heart was a lot different from the others that were there. Okay, Darrell?
One of the things we get from that is giving from your heart,
Okay.
not out of necessity.
Okay, give from your heart, not out of necessity, okay? Any other thoughts? What lesson? Renee?
It's not the amount that you give, it's whether or not you give sacrificially,
Okay.
regardless as to where
Okay.
you are in life.
Okay. And, I've sat through a lot of sermons, not any attempts, okay, where hard line, you guys got to give more and you got to give sacrificially. And if you're not given sacrificially, you're not given right. Okay, we teach that, okay? And they're not necessarily wrong lessons, okay? I've seen them maybe emphasized a little differently. Is that what these verses are teaching, though? Does Jesus praise this woman? Where does he praise her?
He says, truly I tell you, this poor widow has put in more than all of them.
Okay, that's a fact. That's not praise. That's a fact.
Depends on your version of fact.
Okay? Okay?
put her in a better light than them.
Okay, he put her in a better light than him. Okay. In terms of comparison, he certainly saw a lot more good in her than he did in the others. Did he commend her for the fact that she gave everything that she had? Did he? Did you know she was breaking the law by giving all that she had? It's not in the law of Moses, but under Jewish law, it was against the law for this woman to give everything that she had, to not be able to support herself because she gave everything that she had. How does that change your view of these verses? Okay? I mean, we need, giving, being generous, being sacrificial, not just giving out of what we've got left over. Those are all really valid and good lessons. But I think there's something else going on here. What did not happen when this woman put in her gift?
They didn't give it back.
They didn't give it back.
And they had no welfare system, no social security. If she didn't have a son, there was no institutionalized way to take care of this woman.
Okay. They didn't stop her.
They didn't stop her.
None of these pious, holy men who devour widows' houses, who had no, frankly, we can look in other passages, they had a problem taking care of widows. Okay, and just what Renee said here. And so I think maybe there's more criticism going on here of the religious leaders that he had just pointed out to don't trust these guys. You want an example of how evil these guys are? Here's a woman who's not going to be able to take care of herself, and they didn't stop her. And that sort of, I don't know about you, that sort of changes these verses for me. And he's still doing this in front of the disciples, the crowd, and the enemies. He's being right out front with it. Jesus is not sliding into town hoping to get something started over on the side that can mushroom. He's come busting right in, declared his divinity, and continued to criticize and point out the hypocrisy and the evil of those who were supposed to be the ones closest to God. Matt, did you have a comment?
Well, I was just thinking, this is kind of making me think about it differently, because I think possibly we've held the widow who gave everything in this offering up on a pedestal, and that's not exactly it doesn't seem that's exactly what God wants us to do, just drain ourselves to nothing that we can't live another day. Doesn't seem that's what Jesus is pointing out as the best thing to do. Just dump your whole bank account, because that is really giving the most.
What's the instruction from Paul? To give as you've been prospered. You can't find a command any place that tells you that you need to give so much that you can't take care of yourself. It ain't there, okay? The instruction to the rich young ruler to go sell everything and come follow Jesus was not a universal command. It was dealing with that guy's heart and what he needed to do. Okay? Yeah, Chet.
Yeah, kind of between you and Matt. I don't know that we should universalize the command of the rich young ruler, but it seems like there are places where this sort of extreme generosity is praised. So like somewhere, I think it's 2 Corinthians 8, Paul talks about the Macedonian churches that gave beyond their ability.
Good quote.
And it's not, not to say like everyone should just, as you say, empty your bank account. But there are these sort of radical examples of people who are willing to just give everything in faith.
Okay. Well, in Acts, we had people selling property and come and lay in the proceeds at the feet of the.
But I think you're right. I think maybe there's more for us to glean from the passage than just putting this woman on a pedestal. But it is, to me, an extreme example of giving.
Yeah, I don't want to minimize the importance of being generous, the importance of sharing what you have. And frankly, most of us in our culture, in our situation, we don't have a problem with being too sacrificial. That's not really our problem, okay? But by the same token, maybe there's a lesson here to not just, poo-poo the televangelists, okay? To poo-poo those who are extorting from others, but we walk on by and we don't help those who are in need, okay? Maybe there's a lesson there. Chris?
I think there's also a lesson here in her faith.
Okay.
I think that's also something Jesus was pointing out, is that they're throwing in money that they can afford to lose. It's not a matter of dire need with them. There's nothing on the line with the folks that were rich enough to give whatever. But she gave all she had, which implies that she had the faith to give all she had and believe that she was going to be okay and that God was going to take care of her needs. And I mean, remember, we've seen him feed 5,000. We've seen him feed 4,000 with a few fish. He had Peter go fishing and caught a fish with a coin in his mouth to pay their taxes. I mean, this is the Jesus that can make things appear from nowhere. And so I think he's also pointing out her faith and letting us realize that there is a way to live where we can actually have confidence in God in ways that most people would think is crazy.
Okay. Don't want to minimize that a bit, but nowhere does Jesus say anything about her faith. He said, look, don't trust these guys. These guys are extorting and running widows out of their livelihood. Look what that woman did. She gave everything she had, and nobody stopped her. Interesting. Casper.
It seems to me, too, that Jesus is not about, of course, we know, is not about continuing the law. And he's putting the exclamation point on what they're still doing. They're still pushing the law and not working on the heart. So by pointing out to this woman and the way that she is faithful and sacrificial and all of that, that's showing the difference between what he is bringing and what they are still doing.
Let's read on a few more verses, because actually, maybe you don't stop chapter 20 at verse 5. You stopped it at after verse 6. Let's read the next couple of verses. Some of the disciples were remarking about how the temple was adorned with beautiful stones and with gifts dedicated to God. But Jesus said, "As for what you see here, the time will come when not one stone will be left on another. Every one of these will be thrown down." This also is talked about in the other Gospels, and in fact, when we get to Jesus' sham trials, one of the things he's accused of is he said he was going to tear down the temple. Okay. Kind of interesting that on the heels of this story about money and giving gifts, that suddenly we're talking about the grandeur of the temple. Did you know that the temple was under construction at this time? This is the rebuilding, the second or third, depending on how you count them, rebuilding of the temple. I think Herod kind of helped spearhead and get it started. Started in 19 BC and was not finished until 64 AD.
Sounds like a Hillsborough County Road project.
Well, except Hillsborough County Road does not pave streets of gold. Okay? There's lots of gold here. So much so that the reflection off of the gold that covered so much of the structure could be seen, the sun, if you didn't have shades, you couldn't look at it. So bright. Grand project. And so, I don't know if it's the disciples' first trip to Jerusalem, but, think about there is this grand project going on, and it's in progress, and it's getting grander every day. It's like, this is it. We're going to restore the temple. The Messiah is going to come. Man, just look at this. Isn't this great? By the way, according to the description in Matthew and Mark about where Jesus was sitting, he was in an area of the temple where likely this woman was putting in her contribution towards the building fund. They had a number of collection pots, some went for the stone and some went for the gold and some went, for the various components of the temple. And that's likely where she was putting it. Which to me emphasizes even more the fact that they didn't stop her from doing it. Oh yeah, she's giving to the building fund. We need that stuff, we're going to build this temple up. That's great. It's going to make us look good. We're going to... But even the disciples are going, man, we made it to Jerusalem. This is good. Jesus just smacked down his opponents. Things are going great. And we got this great temple. Man, when it gets finished and Jesus is on the throne, man, this is going to be super. And Jesus, I tell you, time's coming when there won't even be one stone. 6 years after it's finished. It's only finished for 6 years before the Romans come in and do exactly what Jesus said that they were going to do. Jesus knew that. They didn't. Okay. And their response to this is, how are we doing on time here? We'll get started on it, and you're going to have 2 weeks to work on this passage. He said, "Teacher," they asked, verse 7, "when will this happen? And what will be the sign that they're about to take place?" Okay, logical question. Man, this is great. Jesus says, look, these are all going to be knocked down. There's not going to be a stone on the other. Well, when's that going to happen? Okay, is that going to happen, Is that going to happen while we're here? Or maybe you're talking about someday way down the road. Okay? And then he begins a section that goes for the rest of chapter 21 that essentially is the end of Jesus' teaching ministry. These are his last words. And both Matthew and Mark have parts of this. They've got parts that Luke doesn't talk about. Matthew's version of this has some more Jewish flavored points that Jesus made that probably wouldn't be relevant to a Gentile audience. But it's a really, really difficult passage to read through because some things seem really clear about what he's talking about, and then in the next breath he's talking about things that we think haven't happened yet. Okay? And folks have really gone off the rails on this passage in lots of different ways, and pulled things out and tried to create whole theologies from this passage. And time-wise, I think we're gonna read and go through it in 2 weeks. But there's a couple of things that I want you to think about in reading this passage. And it's pretty much, they're principles that I think are true whether you're reading, which gospel you're reading. And almost, in a lot of ways, applicable when you're reading Revelation or any sort of end times, end of the world, end of the age sort of stuff. First off, Jesus doesn't answer all the question. He tells them things that are going to happen, but he doesn't really answer their question about when it's going to happen. Okay? He doesn't say, okay, in 3 weeks, or in 35 years or 32 years or whatever it was. He doesn't give them that kind of answer. And it's also important to think about, Jesus knew a lot of things. What did Jesus not know? The day or the hour. Okay? Whenever you're reading Matthew or Mark or Luke where Jesus is talking about end things, he says himself that I don't know the day or the hour. And so as you need to factor that into the, doesn't mean he makes mistakes, doesn't mean that he's confused, but you've got to understand that he is not trying to pinpoint when everything is going to happen. Okay, and we'll deal with that verse in 2 weeks about it says this generation won't pass away. Okay, that gives lots of people lots of trouble. Okay, and we'll deal with that. But he didn't know, but he does know that there's some bad things coming. He knows he's going to be crucified. And he knows that the old law is going to be done away with. He knows that the temple is going to be destroyed and the physical means to maintain temple sacrifice are going to vanish forever. He knows that's going to happen. And he knows he's coming back. And he also knows that before he comes back, those who follow him are going to have difficult times. And in fact, as Luke writes this, not only is he writing to a Gentile audience, and this sort of seals the deal on the fact that Jesus didn't come to town to overthrow Rome. I mean, you cannot read what he says here and come away with the fact that, well, yeah, Jesus, he really came to overthrow Rome. But he's also writing in a time when the church is changing. Gentiles are becoming Christians. There's persecutions and troubles. There are soon going to be more. We're not that far away from when Nero's going to come around. And so the real message, and we'll emphasize this again in a couple of weeks, is the real message to take away from this. And the message that he gives them is persevere and watch. Okay? Be ready so that regardless of what time it is, you're ready. And I think that's if you miss that, if you get caught up in the weeds about, well, what does this phrase mean? And what is that, is that end times or is that destruction? You get caught up in those weeds, you miss his message. Because the message is, I don't know and you don't know when it's going to happen. And it's going to happen suddenly, and you need to be ready, and you need to persevere, and you need to watch. Okay? So your homework for 2 weeks is to read through the rest of chapter 21 and sort of in your own mind try to figure out, what's he talking about? Is he talking about the destruction of Jerusalem? Is he talking about just general persecution of Christians? Or is he talking about end times? And the answer is he's talking about all three. Okay? And sort of kind of see how it is that those pieces fit together. And we'll see if we can't sort of do that in a couple of weeks. I'll give you my opinion anyway. And next week is the Story Slam. And Tim, are we going to live stream that? Do you know?
I hope so.
Okay. All right. So if you're watching online, tune in for something different next week. So appreciate the comments. I hope this is helpful. It's we're not covering a lot of doctrine in here, okay? But we're covering a lot of things, I hope, things that help you understand the depth of the Scriptures, the wisdom of God's plan, and how all this stuff, just fits together. It's not, you don't read the Gospels like you read Proverbs. We go to Proverbs and we find a verse and we pull the verse out and we just talk about it and we come up with a bunch of lessons from it. The Gospels all fit together and it's telling a marvelous story, a deep and interlaced story in the wisdom of God. Let's pray together. God, thank you for this evening chance to open your word. Thank you for the life that Jesus lived, for his boldness, for his willingness, his perseverance in coming through and completing his mission to die for our sins and to become the great high priest. We thank you for the access that we have to you through him that we just couldn't have because you were so holy and we are so unholy. God, give us a heart that is generous. Give us a heart that looks to the needs of others. Give us perspective on the blessings that we have and the physical things that we have, and use them wisely and use them to your glory. God, be with us as we part. Give us rest. Bless our health. Be with us and the people that will be around tomorrow to reflect you. And we pray in your Son's name. Amen.
Thank you for participating in worship at Bay Area Church of Christ. If you have a prayer request or some other need, please let us know by